The flames from my bonfire pit danced against the evening sky when I heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens approaching my house in Prescott, Arizona. I had just settled into my lawn chair with a cold beer, enjoying the crisp October air and the crackling fire I had been looking forward to all week. My name is Keaton, and I had lived in the Copper Ridge subdivision for about 3 years now. The neighborhood was beautiful, nestled in the ponderosa pines with mountain views that made every mortgage payment feel worth it. But there was one problem that had been festering since I moved in, a problem that wore cardigans in 70-degree weather and went by the name of Brenda Morrison. Brenda was the HOA president, a position she took as seriously as a military general commanding troops. She was in her late 40s, with that specific haircut that seemed to be issued along with HOA board membership, the kind that demanded to speak to managers across America. Her lips were always pursed in disapproval, and her eyes scanned the neighborhood like a hawk searching for violations. I had received 17 notices from her in 3 years. 17. They ranged from my grass being a quarter-inch too tall to my garbage, cans being visible from the street for an extra 30 minutes past collection time. The bonfire pit, though, that was my pride and joy. I had spent 2 full weekends building it with my best friend Jake, who also happened to be the county sheriff. We had hauled river rocks, mixed mortar, and created something that was not just functional but actually beautiful. It was set back 30 feet from my property line, built to proper specifications, and completely legal according to both county and state fire codes. Jake had made sure of that, given his position and his obsession with doing things by the book. The police cruiser pulled into my driveway, and I stood up, confused but not particularly worried. I had all my permits in order. What I did not expect was to see Brenda's white Lexus SUV pulling up right behind the cruiser, parking half on my lawn. She emerged from her vehicle like she was attending a funeral, dressed in black slacks and a burgundy blouse, clutching a manila folder that I assumed was filled with whatever complaints she had manufactured this time. The officer who stepped out was Deputy Marcus Chen, someone I had met a few times at community events. He looked uncomfortable, which I understood. Nobody liked being in the middle of neighborhood disputes, especially when they involved Brenda Morrison. "Evening, Chris," Marcus said, approaching with his hands on his belt, an apologetic expression on his face. "Got a call about an illegal fire hazard on your property." "Let me guess," I said, gesturing toward Brenda, who was marching across my lawn with the confidence of someone who believed they owned the entire neighborhood. "Mrs. Morrison here decided that my completely legal, permitted bonfire pit is somehow a threat to civilization as we know it." Brenda stopped a few feet away, her nostrils flaring. "This is not about personal grudges, Christopher. This is about the safety of our community and adherence to our HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. That monstrosity violates Section 14, subsection C, which clearly states that no permanent outdoor structures can be built without prior HOA Architectural Review Committee approval." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would only make this worse. "Brenda, I submitted the plans to the Architectural Committee 4 months ago. I have the approval letter in my house. Would you like me to get it?" Her face reddened slightly, but she did not back down. "That approval was obtained under false pretenses. You claimed it would be a small decorative fire feature, not a massive bonfire pit that creates smoke and disturbs the entire neighborhood." "It is exactly what I described in my application, which included detailed blueprints and measurements. The committee, which includes 3 people besides you, approved it unanimously. I was on vacation when that vote happened. It should have been tabled until I returned. Marcus cleared his throat. Madam, if he has approval from the architectural committee and the proper county permits, I am not sure what you want me to do here. Brenda's eyes narrowed. The county permits are irrelevant if HOA covenants supersede them, which they do according to the documents every homeowner signs when purchasing property in Copper Ridge. I want this fire extinguished immediately, and I want that pit dismantled within 7 days, or I will pursue legal action and daily fines. That is not how this works, I said, my patience wearing thin. You cannot just override the architectural committee because you were not here to vote. That is not in the bylaws. As president, I have the authority to overrule decisions that pose safety hazards or violate the spirit of our community standards, even if they technically meet the letter of the written rules. This is clearly a case where that authority applies. I was about to argue further when another vehicle pulled up, a familiar black pickup truck with county sheriff insignia on the side. Jake stepped out, still in uniform from his shift. He was a big guy, 6'4" with broad shoulders and a no-nonsense demeanor that commanded respect. We had been friends since high school, both of us growing up in Prescott, and when I moved back after my divorce, he was the first person I called. "Evening, folks," Jake said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that came naturally to him. "Marcus, what do we have here?" Marcus looked relieved to see his boss. "Sheriff Donovan, Mrs. Morrison called about Mr. Keaton's Bonfire pit, claiming it is illegal. Mr. Keaton says he has all the proper approvals and permits." Jake walked over to the fire pit, examining it with the same careful attention he had given it when we were building it. Brenda watched him, her expression shifting from righteous indignation to something more uncertain. "Madam, I am not sure what you want the sheriff's department to do here," Jake said, turning to face Brenda. "This fire pit was built to code with proper permits from the county. I know because I helped Chris build it. We spent 2 weekends hauling rocks and mixing mortar. It has proper ventilation. It is the correct distance from structures and property lines, and it uses the right materials." The look on Brenda's face was something I would remember forever. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, her eyes going wide with shock. The manila folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across my lawn in the evening breeze. You built this," she stammered, her previous confidence evaporating like morning dew. "That is what I just said," Jake replied, his tone patient but firm. "Chris came to my office before starting construction. We reviewed the county fire codes together, checked the HOA covenants he had on file, and made sure everything was legal and safe. Then, on my days off, I came over and we built it together. So unless you are claiming that the county sheriff does not understand fire safety regulations, I suggest you take your complaint elsewhere." Marcus was clearly trying not to grin. Brenda bent down to gather her scattered papers, her hands shaking slightly. The HOA still has a right to maintain community standards. And the HOA Architectural Committee approved this project," I reminded her, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "Which means it meets your community standards. Unless you are planning to override the committee you are supposed to be working with, which would probably interest the other board members and the homeowners who elected them." Jake crossed his arms. "Mrs. Morrison, I understand you take your role seriously, and that is admirable. But you cannot use emergency services as your personal enforcement arm for HOA disputes, especially when there is no actual violation occurring. That wastes county resources and could delay our response to real emergencies." Brenda straightened up, clutching her papers to her chest like a shield. I have every right to call the police when I believe a violation is occurring. You have the right to call when you believe a crime or legitimate safety hazard exists, Jake corrected. But filing false reports or abusing emergency services can itself be a violation. I am not saying that is what happened here, but I am suggesting you be more careful about what constitutes an actual emergency versus what is an HOA matter to be handled through proper channels. The threat was subtle but clear. Brenda's face went from red to pale in seconds. She looked at me, then at Jake, then at Marcus, clearly trying to find some way to save face. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "But I will be reviewing the Architectural Committee's procedures to ensure proper oversight is maintained in the future. Good evening, gentlemen." She marched back to her Lexus, taking care to avoid the papers that had blown across my lawn, and drove off with more speed than was probably safe for a residential street. Marcus exhaled loudly. "That woman is going to give herself a heart attack one of these days," he muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry, should not have said that." Jake clapped him on the shoulder. "Go ahead and clear the call as unfounded. And Marcus, good job staying professional. I know she can be difficult." "That is putting it mildly, Sheriff. Have a good night, Chris. Sorry about the interruption." "Not your fault," I said, watching him return to his cruiser and drive away. Once we were alone, Jake grabbed a beer from the cooler I kept on the patio and settled into the chair next to mine. "So that went about how I expected. You expected her to call the cops on my fire pit, on you?" "Yeah, eventually. Brenda Morrison has a reputation. She has called the department probably 24 times in the past year alone, everything from noise complaints to supposed code violations. Most of them are either exaggerated or completely unfounded." I poked at the fire with a long stick, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. "I do not understand people like her. I keep my property neat. I follow the rules. I am quiet and respectful to my neighbors. But it is like she is looking for things to complain about." "Some people define themselves by conflict," Jake said, taking a long drink. "They need to feel important, and for folks like Brenda, being HOA president is their little kingdom. When you built this fire pit, even after getting approval, you essentially challenged her authority. That is why she showed up tonight, to reassert control. Well, she picked the wrong person to mess with. I have documentation for everything." "Good, keep it that way. Because something tells me this is not over." He was right, of course. Jake had developed solid instincts over 20 years in law enforcement, but I did not realize just how right he was until the following Tuesday. I was working from home, doing IT consulting for a firm based out of Phoenix, when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a process server with a packet of legal documents. The HOA was suing me for $10,000 in damages and demanding the immediate removal of the fire pit, plus seeking an injunction that would prevent me from using it while the case was pending. I stood in my doorway, staring at the documents in disbelief. The lawsuit claimed that despite the Architectural Committee's approval, the fire pit violated the community aesthetic standards and posed an ongoing threat to property values and resident safety. It was signed by Brenda Morrison as HOA president and countersigned by the HOA's attorney, a law firm out of Prescott Valley called Hartman and Associates. I immediately called Jake, who listened to my explanation with increasing irritation. "She is actually suing you." "After what happened Friday night, apparently so. The filing date is yesterday, Monday. She must have gone straight to the lawyer first thing in the morning. That woman has issues. Okay, here is what you do. Contact your homeowner's insurance, see if they cover legal defense for HOA disputes. Then get yourself a good attorney. I know someone who specializes in HOA law, guy named Robert Chen, no relation to Marcus. He is tough and he knows his stuff. Will you testify if it goes to court about helping me build it and checking the codes? Absolutely. And I will bring copies of the relevant code sections and the permit approvals. Chris, do not let this stress you out too much. She is on shaky legal ground here, and any decent judge will see that. But of course, I was stressed. Being sued is stressful regardless of how solid your position is. I spent the rest of that day making calls, first to my insurance company, which thankfully did cover legal disputes with HOAs up to $50,000, then to Robert Chen, who agreed to meet with me the next day. Robert's office was in downtown Prescott, in one of the historic buildings near the courthouse square. He was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His office walls were covered with framed thank you letters from clients and legal certifications. "Mr. Keaton, I have reviewed the documents you sent over," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "And I have to say, this is one of the more frivolous HOA lawsuits I have seen in recent years, and I have seen quite a few. So you think we can win?" "I think we can get this dismissed, possibly with sanctions against the HOA for filing a baseless suit. You obtained proper approval from the architectural committee through the established process. You have county permits that verify compliance with all safety codes. And the HOA president's personal disapproval does not constitute a valid legal basis for a lawsuit, especially when she is trying to override a committee decision made during her absence. What about this claim that it violates aesthetic standards?" Robert leaned back in his chair. "That is their weakest argument. The architectural committee exists specifically to evaluate aesthetic standards. They approved your design, which means it meets those standards according to the HOA's own internal process. The president cannot unilaterally decide otherwise just because she does not like it. So what happens now? We file a response, we include all your documentation, and we request a summary judgment hearing. Given the facts, I expect we will win. The question is whether Mrs. Morrison and the HOA board will realize how badly this could go for them and drop it before we get there. And if they do not, then we go to court, we win, and we potentially countersue for legal fees and harassment. HOAs are supposed to serve the community, not pursue personal vendettas. Judges tend to frown on board members who abuse their authority." I left Robert's office feeling more confident but still frustrated. This whole situation was ridiculous. I had done everything right, followed every rule, and yet here I was, being dragged into a legal battle because Brenda Morrison could not accept that she did not have absolute power. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I made sure to attend. The meetings were held at the community clubhouse, a nice building with meeting rooms and a small gym that was actually one of the better amenities the association provided. Normally, about 15 to 20 homeowners showed up. That night, there were at least 50 people crowded into the meeting room. Word had spread about the lawsuit. Small neighborhoods are like that. Everyone knows everyone's business. Several of my neighbors had reached out to express support, including Tom and Linda Martinez, who lived 2 houses down, and Gary Peterson, who lived directly across the street. They were as fed up with Brenda's authoritarian approach as I was. Brenda called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, clearly taken aback by the large turnout. The other board members included Vice President Harold Webb, a retired accountant in his 70s, Treasurer Susan Kim, a dental hygienist in her 40s, and Secretary David Foster, a high school teacher in his 30s. All 3 looked uncomfortable. "Before we proceed with regular business," Harold said, clearing his throat nervously. I think we need to address the situation with Chris Keaton and the ongoing litigation. Brenda's jaw tightened. That is a legal matter being handled through appropriate channels and not suitable for public discussion at a board meeting. Actually, it is very suitable, Tom Martinez said from the audience, standing up. The HOA is using our dues money to fund this lawsuit. We have a right to know why our association is spending potentially thousands of dollars in legal fees to remove a fire pit that was already approved by our own architectural committee. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Brenda banged her gavel, which was such a cliché I almost laughed despite the circumstances. Order, please. The board has determined that the approval was granted in error and that the fire pit poses potential liabilities that could expose the association to lawsuits if someone were injured. That is nonsense, Gary Peterson called out. The fire pit is on Chris's property, built to code and approved through the proper process. The only liability I see is the HOA getting sued for harassment. I will not tolerate disrespect toward this board, Brenda snapped, her face flushing. We are volunteers trying to maintain property values and community standards. David Foster, the secretary, raised his hand tentatively. Brenda, I have to say, I am not comfortable with this lawsuit. I was on the architectural committee when we approved Chris's plans. Everything was properly submitted and documented. I do not understand the basis for claiming it was approved in error. The basis is that I was not present to provide input on the potential issues with the project. But you were on vacation, Susan Kim pointed out. We cannot table every decision whenever you are unavailable. That is not how committees work. As president, my input should be considered essential on major decisions. Harold Webb shook his head slowly. Brenda, I have known you for 15 years. You are a dedicated board member, but this has gone too far. The association bylaws do not give the president unilateral authority to override committee decisions. And frankly, I think we need to vote on whether to continue with this lawsuit. The lawsuit has already been filed. We cannot just drop it. Yes, we can, Harold insisted. As a board, we can instruct our attorney to file a dismissal with prejudice, which means we cannot refile the same claim. I move that we vote on dismissing the lawsuit against Chris Keaton, David said formally. I second that motion, Susan added immediately. Brenda looked furious, but she was trapped by the board's own procedural rules. Fine. All in favor of dismissing the lawsuit. Harold, Susan, and David all raised their hands. Brenda kept hers down. The vote was 3-1. The motion passes, Harold said. I will contact our attorney tomorrow and instruct him to file the dismissal. The room erupted in applause, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but Brenda was not finished. Since the board apparently has no confidence in my leadership, I will make this simple. I resign as HOA president, effective immediately. You can deal with the consequences of letting homeowners do whatever they want without proper oversight. Do not come crying to me when property values plummet and the neighborhood turns into a chaotic mess. She grabbed her papers and stormed out of the meeting, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Harold Webb looked shell-shocked. Well, he finally said, I suppose we will need to elect a new president. Per our bylaws, as vice president, I will assume the role temporarily until we can hold a special election. Meeting adjourned. As people filed out, several neighbors came up to congratulate me and express relief that the lawsuit was being dropped. Tom Martinez clapped me on the shoulder. That was something else. I have been waiting years for someone to stand up to Brenda. She has made this neighborhood miserable with her constant complaints and power trips. I did not mean to cause all this drama, I said honestly. You did not cause it." She did. And honestly, the neighborhood will be better off with her gone from the board. Over the next few days, I watched the neighborhood dynamics shift. Harold Webb contacted me personally to apologize for the situation and confirm that the lawsuit was being dismissed. Robert Chen verified the dismissal and sent me a bill that was far lower than I had feared, most of it covered by my insurance anyway. But Brenda was not done, not by a long shot. She may have resigned from the HOA board, but she was still a homeowner in Copper Ridge, and she was clearly furious about being, as she saw it, publicly humiliated. Her revenge started small. She began documenting every minor violation she could find throughout the neighborhood and filing formal complaints about them. Grass height, paint colors, basketball hoops, decorative flags, you name it. She was no longer in a position of authority, but she was trying to create chaos by overwhelming the new board with constant complaints. Harold called me about 2 weeks after taking over as president. "Chris, I need to talk to you about Brenda. She has filed 67 complaints in the past 10 days. 67. The board cannot keep up with this, and most of them are completely petty. What can you do about it? I am not sure." The bylaws allow homeowners to file complaints, but they did not anticipate someone weaponizing the process like this. "I am looking into whether we can add provisions about frivolous complaints, but that requires a vote and proper notice." "She is trying to make you quit," I said. "She wants the board to collapse, so she can claim she was right about everything falling apart without her. Probably. But I am not giving her the satisfaction." The situation escalated a week later when I came home from running errands to find a pile of garbage dumped in my driveway. Not just random trash, but specific items I recognized from my own garbage can. Along with a dead raccoon, someone had clearly placed there deliberately. It was disgusting and obviously intended to send a message. I called the non-emergency line for the sheriff's department and filed a report. The deputy who came out documented everything with photos and took a statement. I told him I suspected Brenda but had no proof. "Has she been harassing you?" he asked, taking notes. "She sued me through the HOA, but that got dismissed. Since then, she has been filing constant complaints about every little thing in the neighborhood. This feels like an escalation." "You have any security cameras?" "No, but I am installing them today." "Good idea. If this happens again and you catch it on camera, we will have grounds to pursue charges for harassment or criminal mischief." I spent that afternoon installing a Ring doorbell camera and 2 additional cameras covering my driveway and backyard. It was an investment I had been considering anyway, but this pushed it to the top of the priority list. 3 days later, the cameras paid off. At 2 in the morning, I got a motion alert on my phone. I pulled up the camera feed and watched in real time as Brenda Morrison crept across my lawn carrying a can of spray paint. She was wearing dark clothes and clearly thought she was being stealthy. I watched her shake the can and approach my fire pit. I called 911 immediately. "This is Chris Keaton at 2847 Pinewood Drive in Copper Ridge. I have someone trespassing on my property right now, attempting to vandalize my fire pit. I have her on camera." The dispatcher asked if I was in danger, and I said no. The person was outside and I was locked inside. She said deputies were on the way and to stay on the line. I kept watching the camera feed. Brenda started spray painting obscenities across the stones of my fire pit, her movements jerky with anger. She did not notice the camera pointed right at her, or maybe she was too focused on her vandalism to care. Within 5 minutes, I saw patrol car lights approaching. Brenda noticed them too, and she tried to run, but she was not exactly athletic. Deputy Chen was one of the responding officers, along with another deputy I did not recognize. They had her in handcuffs within 30 seconds. I went outside as they were walking her to the patrol car. She saw me and started yelling, "This is your fault. You have turned this whole neighborhood against me. That fire pit is a menace and someone needed to do something about it." "Madam, you need to calm down," Marcus said firmly. "You are already being charged with criminal trespass and criminal damage. Do not make this worse for yourself." "I will not calm down. I dedicated years to this community and this is how I am treated, sued, humiliated, forced to resign. Well, I hope you are all happy now." They put her in the back of the patrol car and Marcus came over to talk to me. "I will need copies of your security footage." "Already pulling it up. I recorded everything from the moment she stepped on my property." "Perfect. That will make this case pretty straightforward. She will probably be released on her own recognizance after processing, but you will be able to get a protective order if you want one. I just want her to leave me alone. Hopefully this will convince her. Criminal charges are serious, and if she is convicted, that is a permanent record." After the deputies left with Brenda in custody, I went back inside but could not sleep. This had spiraled so far beyond what I ever imagined when I decided to build a fire pit in my backyard. All I wanted was a nice place to relax on cool evenings, maybe roast marshmallows with friends. Instead, I was dealing with lawsuits, vandalism, and arrests. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with news of Brenda's arrest. Apparently, several people had seen the patrol cars and the story spread quickly. Harold Webb called me to get details and sounded both shocked and relieved. "Part of me feels bad for her," he admitted. "She is clearly having some kind of mental health crisis, but part of me is just relieved that maybe this will finally end. I hope so. I am exhausted. So is the whole board. We have been dealing with her constant complaints and now this. The board is meeting tonight to discuss our options going forward." That evening's emergency board meeting resulted in a decision to ban Brenda from all HOA meetings and events, pending the resolution of her criminal case, using a clause in the bylaws about homeowners who pose a threat to community safety or order. It was a drastic step, but necessary given the circumstances. The criminal case moved faster than I expected. Brenda was formally charged with criminal trespass in the 3rd degree and criminal damage, both misdemeanors in Arizona. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal that would involve just community service and no admission of guilt, but the prosecutor was not interested given the clear video evidence and the pattern of harassment. It went to trial in early January at the Prescott Justice Court. I had to testify about the history of conflict with Brenda, the lawsuit, the garbage incident, and finally, the vandalism. The video footage was played in the courtroom, and it was damning. You could clearly see Brenda's face, see her spray painting vulgar words across my fire pit, and hear her shouted admission when she was arrested. Jake testified as a character witness for me, explaining how we built the fire pit together and confirming it met all legal requirements. Harold Webb testified about Brenda's pattern of filing excessive complaints after being forced to resign. The prosecutor painted a clear picture of escalating harassment that culminated in criminal behavior. Brenda's defense tried to argue that she was under extreme emotional distress and not thinking clearly, that years of volunteer service to the community had left her feeling unappreciated and disrespected. Her attorney portrayed her as a dedicated community member who just snapped under pressure. The judge, an older woman named Patricia Hernandez, was not sympathetic. In her ruling, she noted that volunteer service to a community does not give anyone the right to commit crimes when things do not go their way. She found Brenda guilty on both counts. The sentencing happened 2 weeks later. Judge Hernandez sentenced Brenda to 1 year of supervised probation, 100 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and full restitution for the damage to my fire pit, which came to about $800 for professional cleaning and repair of the stonework. She also issued a protective order requiring Brenda to stay at least 100 yards away from me and my property, except when driving through the neighborhood to access her own home. As we left the courtroom, Brenda's husband approached me. His name was Gary Morrison, and I had only met him once or twice. He looked exhausted and embarrassed. "Mr. Keaton, I want to apologize for my wife's behavior. She has not been herself for the past year or so. I think the stress of the HOA presidency was affecting her mental health, but she would not listen when I suggested she step back. I hope this can finally be resolved." "I appreciate that, Mr. Morrison. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to enjoy my backyard." "I know. For what it is worth, we are looking at selling the house and moving. I do not think Brenda can stay in this neighborhood after everything that happened. It is too much for her." I felt a twinge of sympathy despite everything. "I hope she gets the help she needs. Thank you, and I am sorry again." True to his word, the Morrisons put their house on the market in February. It sold quickly. The Prescott market was still strong, and they moved to Prescott Valley in March. I never saw Brenda again after the sentencing. Life in Copper Ridge slowly returned to normal. Harold Webb proved to be a competent and reasonable HOA president, focused on actual community issues rather than petty enforcement. The board revised the bylaws to include provisions preventing abuse of the complaint process, limiting homeowners to a reasonable number of complaints per month, except in cases of genuine safety hazards. My fire pit, now professionally cleaned and repaired courtesy of Brenda's restitution payment, became something of a neighborhood gathering spot. On cool evenings, neighbors would stop by with drinks or snacks, and we would sit around the fire talking and laughing. Tom Martinez joked that I should install a plaque commemorating the fire pit that took down an HOA tyrant. Jake came over on a Saturday in April, and we cracked open beers as the sun set behind the mountains. The fire crackled pleasantly, and the smell of burning pine wood filled the air. "You ever think about all the drama that came from this thing?" he asked, gesturing at the fire pit. "All the time. If I had known what would happen, I am not sure I would have built it. Really, I thought about it. No, actually, I would have built it anyway. I did everything right. I followed all the rules. I should not have to change my life because someone on a power trip could not handle not getting her way. That is the right attitude. And honestly, the neighborhood is better off now." I have heard from other folks in Copper Ridge that the HOA is actually functioning the way it is supposed to, focusing on real issues instead of harassing homeowners over nothing. Harold is doing a good job, and the new board members they elected are solid people. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. It had been a long, stressful 6 months, but it was finally over. Brenda was gone. The legal issues were resolved, and I could finally just enjoy the fire pit that started it all. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Brenda, forwarded through her attorney. The letter was surprisingly humble and reflective. She apologized for her behavior, admitted that she had become obsessed with control and power during her time as HOA president, and acknowledged that she needed help dealing with her anger and stress. She was in therapy, taking medication for anxiety, and working on herself. She did not expect forgiveness but wanted me to know that she was genuinely sorry for the harm she caused. I read the letter several times, trying to decide how I felt. Anger was still there, resentment for all the stress and expense and drama, but there was also something like pity. Brenda had clearly been struggling with something deeper than just HOA politics, and while that did not excuse her actions, it did make them more understandable. I never responded to the letter, but I did not throw it away either. I filed it with all the other documents from that period, a strange little archive of one of the most bizarre conflicts of my life. The summer passed peacefully. I used the fire pit regularly, hosted a 4th of July gathering that half the neighborhood attended, and generally enjoyed living in Copper Ridge without constant conflict. The HOA Architectural Committee approved several new projects from other homeowners without drama. Property values actually increased, despite Brenda's dire predictions of chaos without her iron-fisted leadership. In August, I was promoted at work, a nice raise and more responsibilities. I celebrated with Jake and some other friends around the fire pit, grilling steaks and telling stories late into the night. As I looked around at my friends enjoying themselves, at the beautiful fire pit that Jake and I had built with our own hands, I felt grateful. Grateful that I had stood my ground, grateful for friends who supported me, and grateful that everything had worked out. The fire pit was more than just a structure of stone and mortar. It had become a symbol of something important, the idea that doing things right and standing up for yourself matters, even when it is difficult. Especially when it is difficult. As autumn returned to Prescott and the air grew crisp again, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience. It seemed almost surreal now, the escalation from a simple home improvement project to lawsuits and criminal charges. But it had taught me valuable lessons about dealing with difficult people, about the importance of documentation, and about choosing your battles wisely. The new HOA board proved themselves again and again. When the Martinez family wanted to add solar panels to their roof, the architectural committee worked with them to find a design that met both aesthetic standards and their energy needs. When Gary Peterson needed to replace his fence, the process was straightforward and drama-free. The association was functioning the way it was meant to, as a tool to maintain the community rather than as a weapon to control homeowners. I ran into Gary Morrison one last time, completely by chance, at a hardware store in Prescott Valley that November. We exchanged awkward greetings, and he told me that Brenda was doing much better. She had found a part-time job, was continuing with therapy, and had joined a book club. She was learning to find identity and purpose outside of being in charge of something. She asks about the neighborhood sometimes, Gary said. Not in a bitter way, more just curious. I think she misses some aspects of it, but she knows she can never go back. How are you doing? I asked. Better. The new place is nice, and honestly, not being in Copper Ridge is good for both of us. Fresh start, you know, I get that. Well, I hope things continue to improve for both of you. Thanks, Chris. And seriously, thank you for not pressing for jail time or anything harsher. The probation and counseling were actually what Brenda needed. After he left, I thought about that conversation for a long time. It would have been easy to stay angry, to hold a grudge, to want maximum punishment for someone who had caused me so much stress. But what would that accomplish? Brenda was getting help, the Morrisons were rebuilding their lives, and I had my peace back. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well. Winter came to Copper Ridge with the first snow in December, covering the ponderosas with white and turning the neighborhood into a postcard scene. The fire pit was especially wonderful on snowy evenings, the contrast between the cold air and the warm flames creating a perfect ambience. Jake and I started a tradition of having a fire every Sunday evening when we were both available, just sitting and talking about life, work, and whatever else came to mind. You ever think about writing all this down? Jake asked one evening as snowflakes drifted down around us. The whole saga with Brenda and the HOA, it is kind of a crazy story. Who would care about my HOA drama? You would be surprised. Everyone has HOA horror stories. Yours just happens to have a better ending than most. Maybe he was right. Maybe there was value in telling the story, if only as a cautionary tale about how conflicts can escalate when ego and power get involved. Or maybe it was just a weird thing that happened, a strange chapter in my life that was now closed. The holidays came and went. The Copper Ridge HOA organized a neighborhood lights contest and a holiday party at the clubhouse, both well-attended and drama-free. Harold Webb was re-elected as president in January by unanimous vote, along with a full board of reasonable, level-headed people. The association was thriving in ways it never had under Brenda's leadership. I paid my HOA dues in February without complaint, something I could not have imagined doing a year earlier. The dues were reasonable. The money was being spent appropriately on actual neighborhood maintenance and improvements, and I felt like I was getting value for what I paid. It was remarkable how much difference competent, non-authoritarian leadership made. March brought the one-year anniversary of the Morrisons moving out. The house that had been theirs was now occupied by a young family, the Johnsons, with two small kids who loved running around the neighborhood. I had met them a few times, and they were friendly and normal, exactly the kind of neighbors you hope for. Mrs. Johnson, whose first name was Rachel, stopped by one evening when I had the fire pit going. I hope you do not mind me asking, but we heard stories about some drama involving this fire pit before we moved in. Is that true? I gave her the abbreviated version of the story, hitting the main points without going into excessive detail. Her eyes got wider as I talked. That is insane. Over a fire pit, a beautiful fire pit that you built legally. Some people take HOA rules very seriously. Well, I am glad that is over with, and I am glad the current board seems reasonable. That was actually one of our concerns when we were looking at houses, whether the HOA would be a nightmare. But everyone we talked to said things had really improved in the past year. They have. Harold Webb is doing a great job as president. That is good to hear. Well, I will let you enjoy your fire, but we should have you over for dinner sometime. My husband would love to meet you. As spring arrived and the weather warmed, I found myself using the fire pit less frequently, but appreciating it just as much. It had been nearly a year and a half since that evening when Brenda called the cops, since Jake told her he had helped me build it, since everything started spiraling. The fire pit had outlasted the conflict, exactly as it should have. I got a call from Robert Chen, my attorney, in April. Chris, I wanted to let you know that the HOA's insurance company finally reimbursed your legal fees like they were supposed to. You should be getting a check for the amount your insurance did not cover. That is great news. I had honestly forgotten about that. Well, it is about $3,000, so probably worth remembering. Also, I heard through the grapevine that Brenda Morrison completed her probation successfully. No violations, finished all her community service and counseling. Good for her. I mean that genuinely. You are more charitable than most people would be in your position. Anyway, I just wanted to close the loop on everything. If you ever have HOA issues again, you know where to find me. Hopefully I will never need to, but thanks for everything you did. The check arrived a week later, and I used part of it to upgrade my patio furniture and buy a better grill. The rest went into savings. It felt like the final piece of closure on the whole situation, getting reimbursed for costs I should never have had to pay in the first place. Summer rolled around again. hot and dry as Prescott's summers always were. Fire restrictions came into effect in June, meaning no open flames during certain hours due to wildfire risk. I followed the restrictions carefully, only using the fire pit during permitted hours and keeping a hose nearby. The last thing I wanted was to actually create the fire hazard Brenda had always claimed existed. Jake got promoted to undersheriff in July, a well-deserved recognition of his years of service. We celebrated around the fire pit, naturally, with him telling stories about his career and expressing surprise at his new administrative responsibilities. "I joined law enforcement to help people and catch bad guys," he said, laughing. "Now I am going to spend half my time in budget meetings and dealing with personnel issues. But you will be good at it. You are fair, you are smart, and people respect you." "Thanks, man. And hey, remember when the most exciting thing in your life was building this fire pit?" Those were simpler times. They really were not, though. You were going through your divorce, trying to rebuild your life, dealing with all that stress. The fire pit was actually you starting to find peace again. He was right. The fire pit represented more than just a place to have fires. It represented me taking control of my life, making my house feel like a home, creating something with my own hands. Brenda's attempts to take that away had failed because you cannot take away what someone builds for themselves. Not really. As the evening wound down and Jake headed home, I sat alone by the dying fire, watching embers glow against the darkness. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood, kids playing, someone's music drifting on the breeze, a dog barking. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Martinez. "Fire pit gathering this Saturday. Bring whoever. Linda is making her famous salsa." I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I will provide the firewood." That Saturday turned into one of those perfect summer evenings where everything just works. About 20 people showed up, a mix of neighbors and friends, bringing food and drinks and stories. Kids roasted marshmallows while adults talked and laughed around the flames. Someone brought a guitar, and there was terrible but enthusiastic singing. At one point, Harold Webb pulled me aside. "You know, Chris, this fire pit has become kind of the heart of the neighborhood. More people know each other now because of these gatherings. That is what community is supposed to be about, bringing people together, not pushing them apart. I just wanted a place to have fires." This just kind of happened. The best things usually do. As I looked around at my neighbors enjoying themselves, I realized he was right. What started as a construction project and turned into a nightmare conflict had ultimately resulted in something genuinely good. The neighborhood was stronger, more connected, and friendlier than it had been before. Brenda's attempt to control and divide had failed, and in its place was actual community. The fire crackled and sparked, sending glowing embers up into the night sky where they faded among the stars. Somewhere out there, Brenda Morrison was living her life, hopefully in a healthier and happier way than before. The HOA that had once been her weapon of choice was now just a functional administrative body doing what HOAs should do. And my fire pit, the thing that started it all, stood as a testament to the simple truth that standing up for yourself and doing things right matters. I threw another log on the fire and settled back into my chair, content. The battle was over, and everyone, even Brenda in her own way, was better off for it. Sometimes you just have to weather the storm and trust that things will work out if you stay true to yourself and your principles. The night grew late, and eventually people started heading home, calling out thanks and goodbyes. I stayed up a bit longer, making sure the fire was properly extinguished, cleaning up stray cups and plates. The work was meditative, giving me time to think about how far everything had come. When I finally headed inside, I paused at the door and looked back at the fire pit one more time. In the moonlight, it was just a circle of stones, dark and silent. But I knew what it really was: a symbol of friendship, of community, of standing your ground when you are in the right, and of the truth that even the worst conflicts can have positive endings if people are willing to grow and change. I locked the door behind me and went to bed, sleeping the sound sleep of someone who has fought their battles and come out the other side intact. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own moments of joy and frustration. But tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. The fire pit would be there whenever I needed it, ready to provide warmth and light and a gathering place for friends. And that, ultimately, was all I had ever wanted. Everything else, the drama and conflict and legal battles, that was just noise. What mattered was what remained when the noise faded away. And what remained was good.